given everything from the spiking rate of murders in Baltimore to the fact that Anne Arundel County schools are being opened just so children can get at least one daily meal, we're beginning to see more and more that instead of having the government involved, individuals and neighbors and communities need to get involved. And some people would say, okay, well, individuals and neighbors in some weird way, isn't that redundant or something or whatever it is? And I'd be like, well, I'm just talking about levels. For example, one can't be a neighbor of someone unless the neighbor is an individual who happens to be a neighbor of another individual. And for lack of a better term, some of these things are just quite obvious. And for lack of a better term, if you don't want the government to be involved in bottom-up stuff, you have to start from the bottom up to help others. And when I talk about Baltimore and Anne Arundel County, by the way, I'm just talking about, of course, on a Maryland level, though at this point, Maryland is obviously becoming a microcosm for all the other issues that are going on in every other place in the United States. And they say that, at least in terms of climate and other issues, Maryland's already a microcosm. And of course, when I'm talking about climate, I'm talking about meteorological climate. Now we can see that Maryland is pretty much a microcosm of economic climate, political climate, this climate and that climate. And again, it's also the climate of the socio-political and socioeconomic, if you want to break it all down. And the point being, people here even, for example, voted for Governor Hogan because they said, by the way, I was one of the ones who voted for Hogan and Rutherford. Those of us who voted for Hogan and Rutherford said, look, we don't need this big government stuff. We don't need O'Malley and Brown for another 8 years, of course, Brown being O'Malley's lieutenant governor, but this time being governor and having Ken Ullman as his lieutenant governor. So basically, O'Malley and Brown extended by 8 years with Ullman as the lieutenant governor. Point being, those of us who voted for Hogan and Rutherford said, well, we don't need another 8 years of big government, and in our case, O'Malley and Brown. Well, now, just in Maryland alone, now that we have Hogan and Rutherford, we need to start saying, okay, we voted for smaller government, we voted for whatever else, and if we're going to vote for smaller government, don't we need to start being a government at a more bottom-up level? If we're going to talk the talk, we need to walk the walk, and we need to talk to our neighbors in Baltimore and Anne Arundel County and all the other cities and counties in Maryland, and we need to start as individuals, and then as neighbors, and then as communities, and then as whoever else. And then perhaps the murder rate in Baltimore City will go down, and perhaps many kids won't need to go to the Anne Arundel County schools in order to get at least one daily meal for each of them. Maybe there will be more children and more teenagers and more adults who won't feel like they have to murder in order to get ahead in life, and they will feel like, hey, I don't have to take somebody else's life in order to advance my own life, and I don't have to go without a daily meal, and I don't have to continue in the cycle of poverty and what have you. So my point being, just alone in Maryland, and just alone within the Baltimore and Arundel area, and of course there's Howard and other counties within that whole Baltimore, Anne Arundel, Baltimore's vicinity, just alone in Maryland, we're seeing what is going on in terms of why things are not going as well in the United States as they could be. And hopefully Maryland becomes a microcosm not only of the United States in terms of meteorology, forget it. Anyway, my point being, there's an old saying, if you don't like the weather in Maryland, just wait a minute, it'll change. Hopefully Maryland can also say, well, if there's something that you don't like, just look at Maryland. They're working from the bottom up level to try to change things. And as I said, the change is going to have to take place with the individuals and the neighbors and the communities and the counties, whether the county, given as an example, is Anne Arundel or Howard or what have you. And then, of course, goes up to the state level, and then, of course, it goes up from Maryland to D.C., and people hopefully, by the way, look at people in Virginia and in the other states that surround Maryland will hopefully look at Maryland and go, how can we spread what's going on in Maryland to Virginia and then, of course, Delaware and Pennsylvania and West Virginia and elsewhere, and just get what's going on in Maryland spread around the country.